Hi, and welcome to another episode of Hot Takes with me, the Silver Fox. Once again, the SNP has shown that children are not safe under its rule. The soft justice that we saw in a previous case of Sean Hogg, a man who R-ed a child and yet walked free from court with just 270 hours community service, has almost been repeated again. This time the offender did actually go to prison, but he's likely only to do 2 years for exactly the same crime against technically a child. He was an adult. He was aged 19, which is adult in law. The victim was 15, which is child in law. And so this is an adult doing these things to a child, and he's effectively only going to do 2 years in prison. This is not justice. It is the SNP's idea of justice. It is following the guidelines laid down by Humza Yousaf as the Justice Minister. So he is very, very soft on the endangerment of children and their sexual abuse. It goes to show you exactly the sort of person he is when he thinks that this is acceptable. It is not acceptable. We'll take a look at this story. And we're also going to do a follow-up on the Sean Hogg story. But I may do that as a separate video, just a short separate video. Because I don't want to sort of impose the two. I want this one to stand on its own. Just to show and highlight how soft the SNP is on the endangerment of children and why nobody's child is safe in Scotland under this bunch of predators. Was the only word I can say for it. Is that what I think we're now starting to realise what the P stands for in SNP. Anyway, here's this article. So yet another ARA of children has been handed a soft touch sentence because he's under 25. Scottish Conservative MSP Russell Findlay is calling for a review of the SNP's sentencing guidelines after the latest in a long line of cases where serious and dangerous criminals were treated far too leniently. That says more leniently, but far too leniently. The SNP's soft-touch approach to sentencing young offenders has provoked a new row over a second ARA of children being handed a more lenient sentence because of his age. Former child actor Lachlan Harris, 19, was sent last week to prison after being found guilty of R-ing a 15-year-old girl and sexually assaulting another young woman in Ayrshire. So he's a serial criminal. He's done it more than once. This isn't a one-off, accidental, something like that. He now has a history of it. He needs to be put away for a very, very substantially long time, not just to be punished for his crime, but also to ensure that he's off the streets a long time, because he will continue to represent a danger if he was on the streets, and also to send a message to everyone else that you don't get an easy time of it. You're going to be punished harshly. A judge told the teenager that the 4-year jail term, so therefore he'll do 2, would be substantially higher had he been older. The row follows the case of a 21-year-old Sean Hogg, who was ruled too young for prison at 21, but not so young that he couldn't R a 13-year-old girl. And he instead was made subject to a community payback order, bit of community service for doing this to children. The courts have effectively legitimised the art of children, and he's basically saying, look, we're not taking it seriously. If you're young, if you're under 25, go and do it. You'll do 2 years at best. If you're lucky, you'll do 2 years. If you're unlucky, you'll get some community service and have to actually work, But they're just saying it's not very serious. They're saying that the doing this to children is not serious in the eyes of the SNP, in the eyes of a particular person who created this law, a man who seems to think it's acceptable to do this to children, Humza Yousaf. It's his law. He was Justice Secretary when it was brought in, so therefore he signed off on this. This is all down to him. This is how he thinks young girls should be treated. And you can make of that what you will. Hogg of Hamilton attacked a 13-year-old girl at Dalkeith Country Park in Midlothian on various occasions between March and June 2018 when he was 17. He also went on to do it when he was 18, 19 and 20. It went on for quite some time. Opposition politicians and campaigners demand that the SNP government take action to toughen sentencing guidelines, saying that being young should not be an excuse for committing serious crimes. New sentencing guidelines brought in by the Scottish Government last January state that judges must take into account the immaturity of offenders under the age of 25. Do they take in the immaturity of their penises, or should they be, taken into consideration? Is it a child's penis or is it an adult's penis when it's pushing its way into a child? And these are the questions that the court should be asking, not how old is the offender, but how young is the victim, and then sentence appropriately. The Scottish Conservative Community Safety spokesman Russell Findlay said, "This is the latest in a long line of cases where serious and dangerous criminals have either not been jailed or have been given a lesser sentence due to being under 25. They're effectively saying if you're under 25, go and do what you like. The law isn't interested in punishing you. That's SNP policy. This far-reaching change to sentencing was introduced by an SNP government quango last year, with limited meaningful data or public consultation. Yes, it was introduced last year, but it was started and it was overseen by Humza Yousaf. It was all his department at the time. So this can be squarely laid at his door. A man who likes to make it easier for people to do things to children. The consequences are profound, especially for victims who are left wondering why justice is not being done. SNP ministers need to commit to properly evaluating the impact this is having on the victims of these heinous crimes. Sandy Brindley, the chief executive of Crisis Scotland, said, "We understand the will not to impose long prison sentences on young people in many circumstances. Sod that. Don't give a shit about their age. If they do that crime, give them 30 years. They won't do that crime again. Well, not for 30 years anyway. But this SV is an extremely serious crime, and it needs to be met with robust consequences. 30 years. And it doesn't matter their age. They do that. They do the crime. They do the time. And if you start putting in 30-year sentences, let me tell you, there'll be a lot more people thinking twice about doing it." Harris was a child actor who starred along Michael Fassbender and Marion Cotillard in Macbeth, a cinematic adaptation of Shakespeare's play, in 2015. 4 years later, Harris attacked and violently arred a 15-year-old girl at a house in Ayrshire, then sexually assaulted another girl in 2021 near Stewarton in East Ayrshire after he was released on bail. So he was released on bail, and then on bail did it again. This is a man who needs to do 30 years. He can't help himself. He keeps doing it. He is a clear and present danger to children. 30 years minimum. No parole. Nothing. 30 years. That's what this needs. Harris from Renfrew denied the charges against him, forcing his victims to relieve their ordeals and give evidence. A High Court jury in Glasgow found him guilty. And then the judge did nothing. Although Judge McCormack told Harris that custody was inevitable, he added that the term would have been substantially higher had he been older, or if the judge had a spine. In Hogg's case, sentencing judge Lord Lake said if the R had been committed by an adult over 25, he would have jailed the accused for 4 or 5 years, instead giving him 4 years, which was exactly the same, for doing this to a child. Is this justice? But then this is Humza's justice, isn't it? This is Humza Yousaf and his light touch on what you do to children. After widespread fury at Hogg being spared jail, the Crown Office announced on Friday it would appeal against his unduly lenient sentence. I've done a video on that. They want it at least doubled, but I think 30 years. It's there. If you're doing this to children, you've got to be taken out of society until you no longer represent a threat. And if that means the rest of your life, so be it. Hogg's defence team have also given notice they intend to lodge an appeal against his conviction. So you've got this guy, and it's another one. It's another one. One doesn't go to jail at all. Another one gets effectively 2 years for doing these things to children. A law brought in by a man who has a very serious question to answer as to why he doesn't want to protect children, and he wants children to be easily accessible by men, and for the men to not face punishment. It's a salami slice. Let's make the punishments lesser and lesser and lesser until eventually the SNP, like a lot of socialists, want to normalise P. It's the only explanation as to why these things happen and why people are not on the streets, pitchforks and burning flames, setting things alight, rioting and demanding that the courts impose proper punitive sentences. You don't know. You've got to stand up and do something. You've got to vote for a party that is prepared to put people who harm children away for a very long time, and their age does not matter. If you're 18, you're a man. In law, you're a man, and that's it. You do 30 years. Anyway, I'll stop there and come up. I think Humza Yousaf needs to be held to account. He needs to be forced to answer the questions as to why he thinks this is acceptable, why he thinks children do not deserve to be protected in law from such terrible crimes. Why does he think it's acceptable for someone to do this to a child and to walk free from court? If it was his child, would he be happy? I suspect not. But hey, as long as it's not his child, he doesn't care. Now we have to ask what the thinking behind it was. Is Humza Yousaf simply continuing that salami slice where the punishments become less and less and less, and then eventually, well, it's not worth the prosecution, and then eventually it's actually not a crime? It seems to be the direction of travel for certain groups. It's a globalist thing. They all want to push it. Anyone on the left, they keep pushing it. This is why they keep sexualising children. That's why they keep doing these surveys in school. The SNP sending surveys out to 5-year-olds, asking 5-year-olds how they touch themselves. If you don't believe me, go check it out. It seems to be that the SNP is filled with people who have an unnatural interest in children, and they don't want to punish those who do things to children. And as I said earlier, I think we now know what the P stands for in the SNP. And I'll finish there. Thank you very much for watching. If you like what you're seeing here on the channel, please do hit the subscribe button, ring the bell, leave a like, leave a comment, please share the video. And until next time, stay safe, stay well. For God's sake, protect your children, especially from the SNP. And goodbye.